It's May 2018 in Houston, Texas, for the Rockets Warriors Game 7 Western Conference Finals Showdown. This is Remember That Game, the podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my guest is Joseph George, who provides sports analysis for Silver Bulletin and basketball analytics for the NBA G League's Mexico City Capitanes. Houston was a fellow city of Mexico before Texas declared independence in 1836, long before the advent of the three-point line, long before Houston clanks 37 threes in Game 7 here, May 2018. They hired Daryl Morey out of the Celtics front office in 06 and elevate him to general manager in 07, the first quant guy GM, and he leads them out of the wilderness, though it would be another 5 years before they land James Harden. And they and the Golden State Warriors unleash the new meta in the 2010s. Did it seem like Morey already had the ethos of threes and spacing in mind for the Rockets prior to the Harden trade?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you look at the early Rockets, the 2007 to 2009 Rockets, there was a little bit less. Maybe they still, I think, were in the middle of maybe three-point shooting compared to where they were going to be 10 years later. But when you actually look at the way that they played defense, they consistently held other teams to the lowest 3-point rates and forced them to take the longest twos. So they already had that idea that threes were the most efficient shot in the game. They were supposed to prevent those threes from going in.
In that 2012 trade, along with James Harden, the Rockets also received Cole Aldrich, Daquan Cook, Lazar Hayward, while the OKC Thunder got Kevin Martin and Jeremy Lamb, plus 2 firsts and a second, which would become Steven Adams, Mitch McGary, and Alex Abrines. OKC fizzles over the decade, while Kevin Durant ends up on the Warriors. Harden scores more points in his first 2 games than any player debuting with any franchise in history, breaks Wilt Chamberlain's record. Houston immediately snaps a 3-season drought without a postseason appearance, but they lose to the former team of James Harden, the Thunder, then to the Warriors in back-to-back years. In 2017, Harden's first team All-NBA, but home game elimination versus the aging Spurs. Goes 2 for 11 with 6 turnovers. At the time and going into the 2017-2018 season, did you view James Harden as a regular season merchant?
I mean, that was certainly the perception around the league. I remember that my uncle is a big Houston Rockets fan, and I happened to visit Houston that summer, and I pretty much heard about that Game 7 against the Spurs probably for the next a couple, maybe more than a couple times throughout my time in Houston. I don't know if I ever bought that Harden was necessarily a regular season merchant. I think that there certainly were playoff drops for him, but I kind of always gave him a lot of grace. Maybe just because maybe I'm a geek or I'm an analytics guy, so maybe I always gave him that type of grace. But yeah, certainly that was the perception in the league, and I think there were a lot of questions when the Rockets made the moves that they were going to make ahead of the upcoming season. Whether this was Harden was really a guy that you should invest in from a team standpoint.
Bam Adebayo is a very good player. Had a really good conference finals against the Celtics a few years back. You see that upside. But those 83 points, people are wondering whether it is slop, especially compared to Kobe's 81, or if it's half impressive as Jordan's playoff 63 against the 86 Celtics. Is compiling stats and wins December through early March less instructive than it used to be in identifying the best teams and players in the era of tanking and load management?
Yeah, I think it's definitely less instructive. I think that's the most honest answer I can give is I think in March you pretty much see every single year some team go on some incredible run in March. I think last year was the Bulls. They won almost 13 straight games, and it was everyone was like, "Oh, are the Bulls ascending? Are the Bulls going to be a playoff team?" And it's like, no, because you really can't take too much stuff seriously in March. I do think like yeah, like raw box score stats are probably not so useful, but like adding any sample to our impact metrics are is probably worth it if we can like figure out how to discern low leverage minutes from high leverage minutes. So like I think it's more of a mixed answer, obviously. That's but like I would probably lean towards yeah, those March is not a great month for NBA basketball.
And what do you think about shrinking total games for the teams that make the playoffs every year by shrinking the regular season while maintaining total televised games by adding two teams and expanding the play-in?
So in this case, you mean shrinking the number of games for every team, or are
Uh,
you saying for just the playoff teams?
well, shrinking it, yeah, shrinking in this case, shrinking it for every team, though. Some of the play-in, I guess, tier teams do get more games. And then every
Oh,
team
okay.
gets their maybe goes down from 82. The teams that go deep in the playoffs every year, maybe you get a little less tread going down the stretch. Or if you have another, do you have any other crazy ideas like? Oh, hopefully not too crazy. Hopefully that idea wasn't too crazy that I had, but any ideas like that for dealing with the load management issue for teams that are playing 3 or 4 extra series every season?
Oh no, I 100% think that like the league should kind of shrink the number of games each season. I think it's irresponsible, honestly, from like a player health standpoint when we know that like player like it was not as big of an issue 30 years ago to play 82 games because the movements that players were making on the floor when it came to like doing euro steps or they weren't doing euro steps, they weren't contorting their bodies in crazy ways. They were mostly playing on the block. We know now that like consistent pressure on your joints from doing things like euro steps or like I mean now they're taking euro steps to like crazy levels. We just know that that's going to cause kind of like distress for players and like we don't want especially when these players also have like occasionally every 2 years or every 4 years for some players they have like national national games in the summer. It's like it's just way too much to do 82 games, especially when the fans I think fundamentally don't would not really mind if there were less games in the NBA season. Like 82 games it's not like a minimum for fans to be happy with the NBA.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like, how would you then? 'Cause like a sticking point, I'm sure it'll be number of televised games, but like, how can you distribute that from the teams that go deep every season to the teams that don't through plan or through an extra two full seasons worth of games through expansion? Yeah, just a couple ideas tossing out there. An exhausted guard trying to get that lift from his legs in Game 7 there in Houston, and a special playoff campaign ends with 11 missed three-pointers. That's John Starks at the Summit in '94, the Rockets' first NBA title 3 decades later, after Starks goes cold against the Rockets. You have Harden putting up MVP regular season numbers 2017 to 2018. Houston finally gets the inside track on Golden State for the number 1 seed. One difference was the arrival of Chris Paul, who Morey got in exchange for Patrick Beverly, Sam Decker, Montrezl Harrell, Darun Hillard, DeAndre Liggins, Lou Williams, Kyle Wiltjer, and a future first and cash considerations. Some said pairing Paul with Harden was redundant. How do you think that played out?
I mean, I think it was great. Although if you look at the on-offs, I think the clip the some have made the claim that the Rockets were better with Paul as the lead guard and Harden playing the secondary role, which is not obviously not how the Rockets played it out. Um, I don't know exactly where I stand on that. I think I actually kind of agree with that sentiment that Paul was the better player in 2018 than Harden, even though obviously Harden was the MVP and put up all these numbers. But yeah, I don't think Paul was built to like carry the load that Harden was throughout that season. I don't think he ever was during his career. So um, redundant, maybe. I think that was the common sentiment. I think that might be true, but um, I think that type of redundancy is not always bad in basketball when both the players are very good. I think that's like the right maybe take.
And know who wasn't redundant? I have to show the shirt for the video watchers. NBA Jam, Olajuwon, Drexler. I'll come up with as many excuses as I can to reference that team. Though that finals, the '94 finals against the Knicks and John Starks, Drexler wasn't there yet. He would be there for the '95 win, and that's the last NBA championship the Rockets have. But to 2018, Houston finally nabs the 1 seed ahead of the Warriors while shattering the record for 3-point attempts that they had set the year prior. The ensuing years would see this mark get pushed out of the top 10 completely all time. But in the playoff opener here, the haters are having a laugh. Rockets 10 for 37 from three in game one against the 8 seed T Wolves, who are 11.5 point road dogs, but they will get the ball after a Chris Paul turnover. Final seconds, one score game, a test for pedal to the floor Maury ball. What was your sense for the general perception of basketball analytics in the late 2010s with teams becoming more reliant on the three and Houston pushing that envelope?
Yeah, I think it's strange. I think the early 2010s and maybe the late 2000s of the Moneyball revolution, the Ball revolution in sports was like optimistic. It was kind of an underdog story. It was teams who didn't have an edge learning how to gain an edge over the market. But I think almost by the late 2010s, it had kind of, with the Warriors being utterly dominant from 2017 to 2018, I think they also played a very modern style. I think that was the beginning of fans starting to, quote unquote, miss the old days. Um, I think less of that vitriol was directed towards Maury at that point, but I think this specific playoffs changed a lot of people's perceptions as far as basketball analytics and whether it's gone too far, or whether it's even a winning strategy at the end of the day, which obviously I have my own thoughts on. But yeah, I would say that the perception of analytics was like, I think, on a downwards trend by the beginning of the playoffs, and I think by the end of the playoffs it had almost like bottomed out.
And Joseph, you write for Silver Bulletin, the Substack of a man who is not much disputed as the political forecaster of a generation, Nate Silver. 2016 saw an average polling miss within the margin of error, but favoring the losing candidate, though Silver's RIP 538 model was among the closest that cycle. Then for 2018 midterms, the polls rebounded pretty well, even if there were some painful Senate incumbent losses for one side of the aisle. Do you think in any way the public relationship with basketball analytics has moved in parallel with the consumption of election forecasting?
Oh, for sure. I think there is a huge part of this is who the administration was and what they embraced at the time. I think from 2008 to 2016, Obama had a very pro science, pro education approach to all types of subjects. I mean, he himself actually attended Sloan, the conference I was just at, back in 2018. And I think like Obama's administration really, like, emphasized, well, I mean, he even gave my boss, Nate, a shout out, at some point, I think, uh, the 2014 midterms for calling the election right. So, like, I think certainly the administration and the perception of analytics kinda moved in parallel, and then I think 2016 was a major shock to people who had just assumed that the forecasts were always going to be right, when I think that's what people like my boss and I would say other geeks like myself were pretty much shouting, that it's a forecast, and if something says a 73% chance, that doesn't mean it's going to happen 100% of the time. So I would say that like this type of thinking is not always taught in schools, so it's hard to really consume, I think, as a philosophy. A lot of people are not obviously pro sport. They're not pro sports betting in general, but they're not professional gamblers. They're not betting on things very often. I think this is the Maury ball approach. My boss's election forecasts are much more built for people who consume either a lot of betting or a lot of analytical probabilistic content, which is obviously very few people in the population of the United States. While basketball and elections are the major talking points every single year for our culture.
Yeah, and I'm sure it doesn't help when other publications don't say things in the realm of 73%. Instead, they say 99% chance or
Yeah.
uh, just learn about correlated outcomes. Um, but back to the start of the Rockets 2018 playoff campaign, game one against a sneaky good Minnesota team. We'll jump back into the finish there and roll through the Western Conference bracket. Sneaky good Minnesota team with Butler, Cat, Wiggins, and a top three adjusted offensive rating. But the Rockets this year with Trevor Ariza and PJ Tucker, Clint Capella, Mike D'Antoni channeling Ime Udoka a little on the defensive end. They improved from bottom half 2017 up to seventh in adjusted defensive rating. Jimmy Butler turnaround three against PJ Tucker is an airball. Rockets win number 66 on the season. They'd stack up 4-1 series versus Minnie and Utah before the West Final against who else? Steph, KD, Clay, Draymond, and Coach Kerr, who splashed so many clutch threes during his playoff career back in the '90s when Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler were doing their thing. They revolutionized the game through their postseason success, going for 3 titles in 4 years. Did the Warriors at this point? So right here, they're going for 3 and 4 in 2018. It goes to Game 7 in Houston for a chance to go to the NBA Finals, play the Cleveland Cavaliers. In Game 7 here, James Harden does start hot, scoring Houston's first 10, including a 3 and the foul from Klay Thompson. 10-9 Rockets in the early going. How crucial was this matchup on this stage for the second time in 4 years? They play each other here, the Warriors and the Rockets. How important is that in the trajectory of basketball analytics adoption?
Yeah, I would say that the 2018 Western Conference Finals, I think specifically this game is probably, in my opinion, the most probably the most important game of the 2010s from a influence standpoint. I think there are obviously bigger games that were on a national stage. Like obviously I think the 2016 Warriors against the Cavs were that was a huge game, but I think this specifically had a lot of influence in the sport because it really showed what franchises could do from a depth perspective. Houston the Warriors were very top heavy, and not to say they didn't have some good depth, which was they had actually some decent depth as well, but like they were definitely top heavy in that most of their talent was concentrated in their top four players. While the Rockets, if you see, most people talk about Harden and talk about Chris Paul, but like this was kind of the first series that PJ Tucker kind of announced his name, I think, on an NBA stage. Same thing with like I think Clint Capella played really, really well in some of the games of the series. Um, Not well in some other games they will add, but um, this was really a game where they showed, like the Rockets, I think, showed that you can actually almost topple the best team in the history of the sport by playing smart and gaining an edge in the market. And I think since then, you're seeing that that edge is kind of it's diminished now. I think a lot of teams in the NBA right now run with like a very depth first approach, and that original Rockets edge, where they're getting Gerald Green to like shoot threes, is kind of gone now. Like I don't think you're gonna find like super good value just sitting around and like on the waiver wire nowadays in the NBA.
Yeah, these teams pouncing on that market arbitrage. And we'll get to market arbitrage actually here with a signing Daryl Morey made in the 2016 offseason. Um, Eric Gordon, he'd be crucial at the end of the second quarter and the end of the third quarter in this game. Um, Slashing to the bucket. Would like to see a little more of that in this one tonight, but in the series, crucial there. How important was Eric Gordon, and does this series go 7 games without him, do you think?
Oh no way! I think he was super important. I think sometimes people forget like even if a player has a bad shooting game, they're still contributing something by being having the reputation of being a good shooter. I think Gordon was just one of the best shooters of his generation. So having him on the team basically allowed Harden and Capella to operate in the pick and roll. Maybe they should have maybe done that a little bit more, but um, yeah, I think Gordon was super valuable. And for context like him, getting him in that that 2016 offseason when most teams had kind of capped themselves with a bunch of really, really poor players on huge contracts. I mean, Morey was an absolute genius for getting him on that contract. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah, that 2016 offseason when money was flying around, 4 years 64 or 4 years 54 million for Gordon. Compare that to 4 years 64 million for Timothy Mozgov and 4 years 72 mil for a 31-year-old Luol Deng, both handed out by the Lakers, or a couple guys the market shelled out way bigger 4-year contracts for than Eric Gordon's 53 million. We have Chandler Parsons 94 million, Bismack Biyombo 72 million, and a contract Morey gave out that offseason, Ryan Anderson 80 million. How influential was that offseason in 2016 on teams' free agent maneuvers in the aftermath?
I think that I think that free agency basically ended free agency as we know it in the sense that like I think obviously 2019, the offseason in 2019 had a lot of players moving around, but that was kind of the first moment the NBA went from okay, like the highest paid player in the NBA in 2013 was I think Kevin Garnett or something, and he was making maybe 25 million, 20 million, something pretty low, like, and now, players are making almost 60 million, $70 million a year. I think that was the first offseason where we saw that the NBA's cap structure was just gonna keep rising and rising and rising, and teams who weren't practiced on the first go of it made huge mistakes and committed themselves to terrible rebuilding. I mean, the Lakers had to uh, trade D'Angelo Russell just to offload Timofey Mozgov in 2017. They capped themselves really, really badly with their offseason signings. And there are a number of other teams that did that too. So it's not just the Lakers, but the Rockets played it smart. I mean, I think they saw that like the game was just going to keep expanding, and like you sign a guy right now for like decent value, the cap's going to keep going up, and you're going to have him for like incredible value in a couple of years. So yeah, it was super influential, I would say, from a strategy perspective, and it kind of shaped like who the teams that won at the end of the day were the Warriors, the Rockets. Um, I mean, the Cavs didn't make any terrible decisions, but the Warriors and the Rockets were, the powerhouses of the next like 3 4 years, and it was pretty much built off that 2016 offseason.
Do you think these two teams were the best two teams of the 2010s?
Yeah, I do think so. I think honestly, I think I could make the argument that like that it's closer between them than it is between any other team and the Rockets.
And they'll have to rely on that duo of Gordon Harden because Chris Paul is injured. And we also have another problem for Gordon Harden that the threes ain't falling. Steph does start 1 for 7 from the field. So Golden State manages to give Steph Curry maybe his worst half of basketball in a game 7 or in an elimination game in his career. And the Warriors are down 48-33 with 5 minutes left in the first half. It's Clint Capella on the lob, keying the offense for Houston's 16 points on 8 of 9 shooting. Up to that point, Capella would attempt only one shot in the second half. The threes are worth more than twos, but the Rockets would go 7 for 44 from three as Golden State roared back. You mentioned or you alluded to a little bit earlier. Should they have pulled off the gas a bit with the trifecta?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit like that's a mixed question in the sense that sometimes, you even if you want to attack the rim, the shot that you end up getting out of it is going to be a three-pointer. No team in basketball, no team is just trying to chuck up threes as much as people want to say that all the time. No team is truly trying to just chuck up threes as the main strategy. The reason that the threes exist as a main component of offenses today is that they're the most efficient shot outside of getting to the rim, and you can open up the floor more by having your team shoot a lot of threes. So some of what I saw from the three pointers was, that they were playing it correctly, and yeah, honestly, I think my answer there would be with caveats, maybe. Like I would say that the team probably should have taken more timeouts maybe at some point during the stretch and like actually reassessed what they're doing, even if that means, hey, let's continue with the same strategy. It was kind of clear as the game went on that like their momentum was completely killed, especially when you watch it compared to the early part of the game where they look like they're on fire at the beginning of the game and it looks like it's going to be a blowout. It could very well could have been a blowout if they had just kept the momentum going for maybe another 10 points. Potentially changes the course of what we think about the Warriors and the Rockets and James Harden and all the characters in the series. But yeah, I think there was a lot of some poor coaching decisions down the stretch to not like reorganize and huddle up there.
Yeah, that whole weekend seemed to leave an imprint. On the Eastern Conference side of the bracket, we're also going to game seven, baby. And we're also missing an astonishing number of threes. So Rockets went 7 for 44. Celtics went 7 for 39. Some Celtics fans felt like Jason Tatum sometimes wanted to dribble around and jack up a three instead of drive. He only went 2 for 6, not horrendous, but some like high leverage moments. Jalen Brown was 3 for 12 in that game. On the other side, Gordon goes 2 for 12 and Harden goes 2 for 13. Uh, what was the impact on the discourse of all the missed threes that weekend with the 2 game 7s for the conference?
I mean, yeah, I certainly remember that like my friends had made the claims that like the team shouldn't have shot the threes and shouldn't have played that way, and that's why they lost and whatnot. Um, I think that that definitely was the overriding discourse. I do remember social media after that game, after the Rockets game, was very much talking about how you live by the three, you die by the three, and that they didn't deserve to win it. But I was always of the opinion that look, the Rockets had a talent discrepancy compared to the Warriors. So did the Celtics. Well, I wouldn't say so did the Celtics compared to the Cavs. I think maybe those teams were more on even footing. And don't get me wrong, the Cavs also shot. They also shot a lot of threes in that playoffs. Maybe not in that game. Like they I can't remember exactly how many threes they shot in that game, but they were also playing this like heavy three ball strategy. The thing is, when you have a talent discrepancy against a team, threes are the best way to like offset some like to actually like have. It increases variance, for example, right? So like you can if you're a worse team, if you jack up threes and if you happen to make a slightly higher percentage of them in this game, you just increased your odds of winning. And I would say that like that played a role in how the Rockets and a bunch of teams played at the time. And so I would not be one of those people that would say the Rockets should have changed their play style and do that. But I do know that a lot of people were saying that.
Yeah, the Cavaliers shot 35 threes. So the Celtics in the game went 7 for 39. Uh, Cavs not a ton better, 9 for 35, but perhaps the Cavs win that game by 8, 87-79. So possibly the difference there, but yeah, like you said, Cavaliers were no stranger to the three-pointer that weekend either. The weekend of Game Sevens, and this one, the Rockets don't run away with it. They probably wish they got more insurance while Steph was cold. Clay really stabilized Golden State in the second quarter as they keep it to 15 through that struggle bus first half for Steph. Again, 48-33 when Steph gets one to finally fall, and then Clay, original splash bro, cuts it to 9. A KD jumper you can't defend fouls that up, and the Warriors are not getting run out by halftime. They're well in it. Again, those KD jumpers, those Kevin Durant jumpers that you just can't defend. Did this make you a second apron fan years later? That when Steph's cold, and you still have Clay and Durant.
Yeah, no, yeah, I kind of for some reason have nostalgia for this era where I hated the Warriors so much and I would watch them basically out of spite and just because like it was so unfair that this team existed in any way. So maybe I don't know if I appreciate the second apron a little bit now. I think there's more storylines back then, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think for parody for sure. It was absolutely ridiculous that like Steph Curry could start a game 1 for 7 and the team still and the team that they're playing be very, very good and they still win that game. I think it was just almost unfair for any team to have to play against them. And they were playing without Iguodala, by the way. This is literally the worst part of this. They were playing without their fifth best player. Their fifth best player was not in the series, and they were still competing with this team that was just like one of the best of its generation.
No second apron back when Drexler joined Olajuwon. A different aesthetic style, that Rockets team back in 95. And Harden will miss 11 threes to match John Stark's mark in 94 against the Rockets. Steph finally gets a rhythm going in the third quarter. His 14 points will key a 33-14 third quarter advantage. You see some cold streaks from the Rockets. The three is not falling, and it's 76-69 Warriors entering the final stanza. But the Rockets had won this with someone who could do some more work in the post or at the elbow, like say Hakeem Olajuwon.
I don't think so because the style. I mean, obviously, no. Like, don't get me wrong. Okay, I think there's a famous Daryl Morey quote where they ask him like, oh, you don't like guys that play in the post. Did you like Shaquille O'Neal? And I think Daryl Morey's like, yeah, I'll have Shaq on my team. I mean, I think that's the way it would work for Hakeem Olajuwon. Like, look, I'm not turning down Hakeem Olajuwon on my team no matter what, but I don't think that the Rockets necessarily needed a post player to. I don't think the Rockets definitely needed a post player to like really play the way that they needed to play to win the series. I think some of it came down to luck. This was a tail outcome. This was not something that would normally have happened. 7 for 44 is pretty crazy. Um, but I think a post player would have muddled up their offense a bit. I think they needed a spacing, and I think they needed a pick and roll partner for Harden.
The old heads want to see some smooth post moves. So me, I feel something watching those old videos. Beyond just the '90s nostalgia, Hakeem the Dream versus Shaq. But in 2018, midway point of the fourth quarter, Clint Capella, not quite the same game, but a big, has taken his one shot attempt of the second half, and that two cuts it back down to single digits, 83-75 Warriors. Uh, then Kevin Durant, end of the shot clock, obscene contested three from 30 feet. James Harden was all over it, and it still drops. Steph Curry's getting looks from three and hitting them, or they're challenging him on the perimeter, creating a pick and roll, easy layup for Kevin Durant on the assist from Steph to extend the lead again, 97-85 with 3 minutes left. Three in the layup. What some lament is the dichotomy of the modern game. What could the NBA do to reconcile the analytically optimal versus the aesthetic interests of the old heads? Or could the value of a Zach Randolph type cycle back organically like the run game has in the NFL?
Well, yeah, I'm not. I with NBA trends, it's so unpredictable. I think that like I'm not going to rule out that one day, as a result of some rule change or some slight rule change, teams start bringing back guys who are not big contributors today. But I would say that like the NBA has already been undergoing an evolution since 2018. I mean, if you watch an NBA game now and you look at an NBA game in 2018, it's like almost it's there's a stark difference in how teams play, because it's the offensive rebounding stuff for the NBA has become a bigger deal since 2018. I can't remember exactly how many offensive rebounds the Rockets got. I remember Clint Capella grabbed a pretty big one at some point in the game, earlier in the game. But yeah, offensive rebounding has become a huge deal now in the NBA. So I would sometimes when I think about like the evolution of the NBA as it relates to analytics, I would say that like analytics is not just looking at shot distributions. That was the main innovation of the 2010s, but um, the NBA analytics are really just a tool to find an edge to win, and that edge could come from really anything as the game goes on.
You're probably decent amount younger than me, but do you feel any affection for the NBA and NBC, um, aesthetic, returning?
Oh,
And then
uh, yeah, 100%. I was literally showing my friends, the other day, like, I was showing my friend and my girlfriend, like, the NBA on NBC intros and, like, how I like that they're doing, like, the throwback nights and the retrospectives because, man, when that theme song comes on, it's there's really nothing better than that, and especially when, like, the NBC logo with the lasers starts shooting out, it's like it's
yes.
really it's something special. Like, I don't know how they found that. I don't know how they exactly landed on that, but it's almost the perfect intro for any TV event is the NBA on NBC. So, and I think for years and years, ESPN and TNT did such a bad job with presenting the NBA as a product. It's like good to see that one organization has actually focused on presenting it in a way that fans actually want to see it and not just optimizing it for like they just knew for a while they could put low effort into it because fans would watch it anyway. And I think I'm happy that an organization is kind of skirting that and like actually trying to do the right thing for the fans.
There were moments over that final half of the 4th quarter, Houston does get it down to the 6 to 8 point range. Eric Gordon, hits a mid-range shot, love seeing that, but he and Harden, they seem to try to get to the rim for buckets more down the stretch, or Harden will find PJ Tucker for a made three. So down the stretch, that duo with Chris Paul out is a little chastened by all the long range misses, it seems. Though Harden does get in one last miss, down 41 seconds or down 7 with 41 seconds left. I guess at that time deficit, you probably need that 3 versus the 2 math to have any shot.
Yeah, no, they kind of had to go for that one. It was the right play.
Yeah, and just that, as mentioned, that day just happened to not be falling for Harden. As the Warriors make it 4 straight NBA Finals appearances with a Game 7 final of 101-92, and the Cleveland Cavaliers once again emerge from the Eastern Conference to give us a Warriors Cavaliers rematch for the third time in three. What is it? 15, 16, 17, 18. Fourth
Yep.
time in 4 years. My goodness.
Yeah.
Uh, Not thrilling as, say, Pacers Thunder in 2025, as that ends up being a 4-0. Get the sweep by Golden State in that final uh, Cleveland Golden State matchup. Do you think it could have been the Rockets if Chris Paul stayed healthy? And did that, he gets injured in Game 5 that series. Do you think it impact the load management discussion like we're seeing amplified again in 2025 with injuries to Tatum, Lillard, and Halliburton? But yeah, so that two-parter there. Could they have won with Paul? And what do you think that does to the load management discussion we're seeing reemerge?
Yeah, I think they definitely could have won with Paul. I would argue that they probably were the favorites with Iguodala's injury being something. I think they were probably the favorites in the series. I also think going up 3-2 with at least one game basically back on home if you lose in game 6 is like an unbelievable advantage. And if you saw, I think game 7 is probably the most important game of the series from like a narrative discussion. But my favorite game of the series is game 5 when they actually go up 3-2. It's an unbelievably gritty win down the stretch because like PJ Tucker grabs like 16 rebounds or something as like a 6'5" power forward playing against like Draymond Green, and it's pretty unbelievable stuff. And then I think yeah, on the Chris Paul injury question, yeah, I think it raises some questions about load management. I think we're still seeing it nowadays. Like last year in the playoffs, we saw so many injuries down the stretch, and it's like ultimately you want your fans, like the people who are watching national TV games at the end of the year in the playoffs, you want them to watch the best players. I think like I'm not sure if those 10 extra games from a 72 game to an 82 games standpoint are like really what I don't think the fan really cares about that. I don't think the fan needs an extra 10 regular season games if it means that they're going to have to lose potentially seasons for players who are going to tear their Achilles or ruin their hamstring or something else.
And does it seem like the general vibes toward analytics in politics and basketball are different this decade? Now, 7 NBA seasons and 2 presidential elections in, compared to the 2010s.
Yeah, 100%. I think the way that analytics and the geeks were the underdogs in sports and politics for a very long time. Recently, The Ringer put out a documentary, a short documentary on the Sloan Conference and its
Oh,
originations and whatnot, and it was very good because it highlights that when Sloan started, when the geeks got in the game the first time, they were the underdogs. They were the people trying to break into this industry who had a bunch of traditional scouts who didn't want to listen to new ideas. And but by now, by 2020, by 2026, like the geeks are not always in charge, but they have like a lot of influence on like who gets signed by every team, on like if pretty much most teams are running analytics based strategies. I think to different extents, obviously. I think Philly's probably running a little bit more analytics than um I want to say like Philly's probably running more analytics than like say Detroit probably is, but like I think all teams now are running more analytics than they ever were back in 2018. And then if you compare that to 2010, like obviously there's a huge stark difference between that. And I think it's cool. I think the trend of analytics and in politics and sports has been for the casual fan not very fun, but I think for me as someone who's a geek, I think I can only see the advancements from analytics and I can see how much innovation it's brought to the NBA and in politics as well.
yeah, I'll have to check out that. Yeah, more great work from the Ringer, that documentary, and also yeah, your work and the work in analytics and sports and politics over at Silver Bulletin. What are you most excited about covering this coming postseason? The NBA and NBC aesthetic and all back. What are you most excited about covering this 2026 NBA postseason?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in the Hornets and their current push. I mean, they have the best net rating in the NBA over the last 30 games or something. It's pretty crazy. But they're only 63% on like I believe it's Kalshi or Polymarket, one of the two, to make the postseason. Um, which is interesting. So if they get in the postseason and they're playing the way that they currently are, they're potentially a team that could make a first round exit. Potentially, if they're playing the Knicks or the Cavs, one of those two teams. And then on the other conference, the Spurs Thunder matchup, if it happens, should be a great one. Um, because I'm a Spurs fan. I don't really try to cover my Spurs fandom in my writing, but personally, the I was all in on the tank for Wembanyama when it happened, and then when we finally got him, it was pretty crazy. So this would be the first postseason where that stuff's gonna pay off.